I had convinced myself that this trip was nothing more than a favor, just a weekend getaway to help Mark's old college friend with a few repairs on his family's farm. Mark couldn't come because of his work schedule, and I didn't argue. I told him it'd be quick, quiet, and uneventful. Maybe part of me even wanted the silence, a break from the growing distance between us that neither of us dared to talk about. The drive was long, the roads narrow, and by the time I reached the farm, the sun had dipped behind the hills. I expected someone older, someone gruff and practical, not the man who stepped out from the barn as I parked my car. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans as he approached, calm, steady, with the kind of grounded presence people only gain from years outdoors. His hair was sun-streaked, his smile warm but cautious, like he wasn't used to meeting strangers but was trying anyway. "You must be Ethan," he said, offering a hand. His voice was softer than I imagined, deep but gentle, carrying a kind of unhurried sincerity I hadn't heard in a long time. I shook his hand, expecting a quick greeting, but something lingered, maybe in the way he looked at me, quietly observing, or in the way his hand stayed in mine a second longer than necessary. I dismissed the feeling as exhaustion. This was a farm, not a fantasy. I wasn't here for anything more than a practical visit. The air smelled like hay and wood smoke. The farmhouse stood old but sturdy behind him, its porch light flickering as the wind brushed past. Everything felt still, untouched by the chaos of city life. Caleb helped me unload my bag, insisting I didn't have to lift a thing. "Long drive," he said. "You shouldn't have to carry more than you already did." I laughed lightly, brushing off, but inside I felt something shift, someone caring for me without tension, without expecting anything in return. Inside the house, Caleb showed me the guest room. It was simple, clean, and the window looked out onto a field stretching endlessly into the distance. "If you need anything, extra blankets, water, whatever, just knock," he said. There was an openness in his eyes, something unguarded that made me look away too quickly. I didn't know him, but something about his presence felt strangely familiar, like meeting someone you should have known years ago. We had dinner at his kitchen table. Nothing special, just grilled vegetables and bread, but the conversation flowed more easily than I expected. Caleb wasn't loud or overly friendly. He listened, really listened. When I talked about my work, he asked thoughtful questions. When I mentioned Mark, he nodded as if he respected boundaries without needing explanation. But I still felt a guilt crawl into my chest, because every time he smiled, something fluttered in me, something I wasn't supposed to feel. As the night deepened, the farm grew quiet. Crickets took over the soundtrack, and the house settled into a peaceful rhythm. I stepped outside for fresh air while Caleb washed the dishes. The stars above were brighter than anything I'd seen in years. Without city lights, it was like the sky was speaking in a language people forgot existed. I heard the screen door creak behind me, and Caleb joined me on the porch, leaning against the railing. "It's different out here," he said softly. "Everything slows down. You can actually hear your own thoughts." I didn't tell him that sometimes my thoughts were the last thing I wanted to hear. Instead, I nodded. "It's peaceful," I replied, "almost too peaceful." He laughed gently, and the sound settled warm in my chest. "You'll get used to it," he said. "Most people do." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, though nothing was said or done to justify it. Just the two of us, standing side by side, breathing in the same quiet night. Caleb turned his head, studying me not in a bold or invasive way, but in a way that made me feel seen, really seen. And something inside me stirred, something I tried to push down immediately. I reminded myself of Mark, of home, of loyalty. But then Caleb looked at me again, and this time there was something in his eyes I couldn't name yet. Something warm, something dangerous, something I hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. And for the first time during the entire trip, I felt uncertain, not about him, but about myself. The next morning, the farm was alive in a way the city could never replicate. The sun rose over the rolling hills, casting gold across the fields. I woke early, not out of necessity, but because something about being here made me restless. The sound of roosters, the gentle clinking of water buckets, and the earthy smell of dew-soaked grass pulled me outside before breakfast. Caleb was already there, moving through the barn with quiet efficiency, handling chores with ease. The way he worked, so fluid and natural, was mesmerizing. I found myself lingering at the doorway, watching him, trying to ignore the tug of my chest that seemed to grow every time our eyes met. "Morning," he said without looking up, his voice calm but carrying a subtle warmth. "Coffee." It was a simple offer, but the casual way he included me made it feel personal. I nodded, stepping closer. He handed me a steaming mug, the warmth seeping through my hands, though it was nothing compared to the heat of his gaze. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the rising steam. Instead of him, the guilt bubbled under the surface, reminding me that I had Mark, that I belonged somewhere else. But in this moment, the farm, the early sun, and Caleb's presence made those boundaries feel fragile. We worked together on the morning chores, fetching feed for the animals, cleaning stalls, and moving equipment. His patience with me was almost startling. He guided me gently, never condescending, never rushing. Every time our hands brushed, a jolt ran through me, sharp and disorienting. I told myself it was just proximity, the kind of accidental sparks that happen when people spend time together in close quarters. But when he smiled at something I said, a private joke, a small comment, I felt my heart twist unexpectedly. I had never felt this kind of connection outside of Mark, and yet here it was, insistent and undeniable. Breakfast was quiet, just the two of us at the table. The wind rattled the window panes, and the smell of fresh bread and eggs filled the room. Caleb's eyes often lingered on me, though I tried to catch him looking and then pretend nothing happened. There was something magnetic about him, a pull that I couldn't name but couldn't resist. My mind kept returning to the look he had given me the night before, soft, assessing, and full of an unspoken understanding. I wasn't sure I wanted to understand it, yet I found myself wanting more. More the way he listened, more the quiet comfort of his presence, more the inexplicable energy that made my chest feel tight and light at the same time. By mid-morning, Caleb suggested we take a break and walk along the edge of the property. He didn't ask, he just assumed I'd follow, and somehow I did without hesitation. The path wound through tall grasses, leading to a small pond that mirrored the sky above. Ducks drifted lazily on the water, and the trees whispered in the breeze. For the first time, I felt completely unguarded, like I could breathe without carrying the weight of my usual self. Caleb walked beside me, close but not intrusive. He didn't talk, and I didn't need to. The silence between us was comfortable, layered with subtle tension that neither of us acknowledged aloud. Every glance, every slight shift of his posture, seemed to carry a message I wasn't supposed to decode. But I couldn't stop trying. Eventually, he spoke, soft and easy, about the farm, his family, and his plans for the land. His words were mundane, yet something about his sincerity drew me in. He laughed at small things in a way that felt contagious, and I realized I was laughing too, more freely than I had in months. There was no pretense, no agenda, no expectation, just a raw, human connection that made me feel lighter and heavier at the same time. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between us. Yet part of me held back, haunted by Mark's face and the boundaries I knew I should not cross. By the time we returned to the barn, my thoughts were tangled. Caleb noticed my distraction and asked if I was okay, and when I nodded, he didn't press further. Instead, he offered a reassuring smile, a gesture so simple yet profound that I felt my chest tighten again. I had always thought of infidelity as a conscious act, a deliberate crossing of lines. But here, in the serene place with this gentle man, I realized it could start quietly as a feeling, as a connection that challenges everything you thought you knew about yourself. And despite my best intentions, I knew that the line I had sworn never to cross was already blurred. The afternoon stretched ahead of us, filled with chores, quiet conversation, and subtle glances. I could no longer pretend that nothing was happening. Something between us had shifted, something delicate and fragile, but undeniably powerful. And though I tried to hold on to the rules and promises I had made elsewhere, I felt, with a mixture of excitement and dread, that this weekend would change everything, even if I didn't yet understand how. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the fields, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. I found myself lingering near the barn, pretending to adjust a few tools, though I had no real reason. Caleb appeared beside me, carrying a basket of freshly picked vegetables. "Want to help?" he asked casually, as if it were just another chore, but the way he looked at me sent a ripple through my chest I couldn't ignore. I took the basket, and for a few moments our hands brushed while arranging the produce. A simple contact, yet it carried a tension neither of us acknowledged. We worked in silence for a while, the kind of companionable quiet that felt rare and precious. I realized I had become acutely aware of every detail about him. The curve of his shoulders as he bent, the way his hair caught the sunlight, the warmth of his voice even when he spoke about mundane things. It was exhausting and exhilarating all at once. I reminded myself of Mark and the life I had promised to uphold. Guilt clawed at me, but it was soft, almost drowned out by the unexpected comfort Caleb's presence brought. Later, as the sun dipped lower, Caleb suggested we check on the far field, where the younger animals were kept. I followed, trying to mask the nervous energy in my step. The path wound through tall grasses and wildflowers, their fragrance heavy in the warm air. Each step beside him felt charged with meaning, though nothing was spoken. He glanced at me occasionally, and each time I caught his gaze, I felt a strange vulnerability, as if he could see into the part of me I usually hid, the part that longed for attention, for understanding, for something more than routine life. At the far field, he paused, leaning against the fence, looking out over the horizon. "You seem different here," he said softly, almost himself, then looked at me with a curious smile. "Not like your usual self." I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. The truth was, I didn't entirely know either. I felt more alive, more present, and yet more conflicted than I had in years. I guess I needed a break. I admitted finally, letting my voice sound steadier than I felt. He nodded knowingly, but his eyes stayed on mine, searching, assessing, drawing me in without words. As the sky shifted to shades of pink and violet, we lingered near the fence. Caleb spoke about the changes he hoped to make on the farm, about the seasons and the cycles, and I listened intently. There was a rhythm to his speech, a patience in his manner, that made the world outside, the work, the responsibilities, the pressures, fade into a distant memory. I laughed quietly at something he said, and he smiled, the kind of easy, genuine smile that made my chest tighten. In that moment, it was hard to remember that I belonged elsewhere, that someone else's heart depended on me. Everything about this place, this person, this fleeting connection, felt almost sacred in its simplicity. When it was time to head back, Caleb offered to carry the basket of vegetables. I protested half-heartedly, knowing he would insist. Walking back, our shoulders brushed repeatedly, each contact brief but electric. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words seemed trapped behind a wall of awareness, of boundaries I knew I shouldn't cross. And yet, the silence between us spoke louder than any conversation could. Every glance, every movement seemed to carry an unspoken understanding, a pull towards something undefined. That evening, after chores were done, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky deepened in navy, and the first stars began to twinkle. Caleb leaned back in his chair, hands wrapped around his mug. I found myself stealing glances at him, captivated by the ease of his presence. He caught me looking once and tilted his head slightly, a half-smile forming on his lips. I looked away quickly, guilt stabbing my conscience, but the warmth of his attention lingered longer than it should have. We spoke little, letting the night settle around us, the crickets and soft wind filling the spaces where words could have been. And yet, in that quiet, I felt a profound connection, one that went beyond mere attraction or curiosity. It was as if our souls were speaking in a language neither of us fully understood, drawing us together despite the rules I had tried to follow. I felt conflicted, torn between loyalty and longing, safety and risk. I had come here expecting nothing but work, a weekend on a farm. Yet now I realized that even a fleeting glance or a gentle smile could shift the course of the heart. By the time I retreated to the guest room, I was restless, thoughts spinning with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Caleb's presence lingered in my mind like the fading light outside, subtle yet insistent. I knew that this connection, however innocent or profound, could change everything, and the realization filled me with both fear and anticipation. The weekend was still unfolding, and already I sensed that the farm, the quiet, and Caleb's gaze had left an imprint I might never fully erase. The next morning, the air was crisp, and a thin mist hovered over the fields. I woke early again, my mind restless, replaying every glance, every smile, every word from the previous day. Caleb had already left the farmhouse, heading toward the barn, and I couldn't help but watch him move with effortless ease. There was a rhythm to his motions, a quiet confidence, and yet a softness in the way he interacted with the animals, the land, and with me. Something about seeing him like this, so natural, so grounded, made my heart ache in ways I hadn't expected. I reminded myself of Mark, of the life I had promised to nurture. Yet even as I did, I realized that my feelings for Caleb had grown in ways I couldn't simply ignore. Caleb noticed me on the porch and smiled, a small, knowing expression that seemed to acknowledge what I couldn't say. "Morning," he said, and it was a kind of greeting that made the world feel simultaneously heavier and lighter. I nodded, fumbling with my coffee mug, trying to suppress the flutter in my chest. He didn't press, didn't push, but there was a gentle intensity in his gaze that made it impossible to look away. We moved the morning chores together, and while our actions were mundane, feeding animals, repairing fences, organizing tools, the air between us was charged with unspoken feelings. Every glance, every touch of the hand, every shared laugh carried a weight I wasn't prepared for. By midday, Caleb suggested a break, and we walked toward the pond again. The path was quiet, the tall grasses swaying with the breeze, and the sunlight created shifting patterns on the ground. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, talking about my doubts, my fears, and the distance that had grown between Mark and me. Caleb listened intently, his presence comforting, non-judgmental, yet his eyes held a depth that made my heart race. He didn't offer solutions or advice. He simply listened, and the act itself felt revolutionary, almost intimate. I realized that the connection I felt wasn't just physical, it was emotional, something far more profound than I had anticipated. When we reached the pond, we paused. The water mirrored the sky above, calm and reflective. Caleb turned to me and smiled softly. "You deserve to feel alive," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they struck me like a revelation. I swallowed hard, torn between a life I had promised elsewhere and the intensity of the moment. I felt a pull toward him, a magnetic force that defied logic, and I knew that whatever happened during this weekend, my perspective had already shifted irrevocably. My mind screamed caution, yet my heart ached with longing. We lingered there for a while, speaking in low tones, our conversation moving from mundane topics to subtle personal confessions. There was a closeness growing between us, one built on shared silences, quiet laughter, and mutual understanding. I could see the way Caleb regarded me, careful, respectful, yet undeniably drawn to me. It was intoxicating, and the pull between us became almost impossible to ignore. I felt my chest tighten every time our hands brushed, every time our eyes met, and the guilt mixed with exhilaration in a way that left me dizzy. I was caught between two worlds, two loyalties, two desires. As the afternoon waned, we returned to the farmhouse, carrying baskets of produce. Our movements synchronized almost instinctively. Caleb paused at the door, looking at me with that same soft intensity. "This weekend, it's been different," he said, voice low, almost hesitant. I nodded, words failing me, because I couldn't explain the storm of emotions inside. I realized that while nothing explicit had happened, everything had shifted, boundaries had blurred, hearts had been exposed. And though I still loved Mark, though I still planned to return to him, I knew that part of me had already changed forever. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and orange, I stood on the porch alone for a moment, the quiet of the farm pressing around me, the distant hum of crickets settling into the night. Caleb joined me silently, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. We didn't speak, but the shared presence was enough. I realized that the weekend, the farm, and Caleb's gaze had brought me clarity, not about infidelity in the physical sense, but about emotional truth, about the parts of myself I had neglected, about the desires and longings I hadn't acknowledged. Eventually, I knew it was time to leave. The trip had been short, yet transformative. I packed my bags quietly, aware that Caleb was nearby, and when I said goodbye, his expression was gentle, almost sad. "Take care of yourself," he said. A simple farewell, but it carried more meaning than any words could convey. I nodded, feeling a tug at my heart as I left the farm behind, knowing that something inside me had shifted irrevocably. I didn't know what the future held, whether Mark would notice or whether I could ever return to the person I was before this weekend. But I knew that the glance, the moments, the quiet intensity of Caleb's presence had left a mark I could never erase. As I drove away, the farm disappearing in the distance, I realized that life didn't always follow the lines we drew for it. Sometimes the heart found its own way, leaving us changed, uncertain, and profoundly alive. And for the first time in a long time, I felt both fear and hope coexisting in a way that felt startlingly honest.